I'd like to see a whole new category of healthcare created called conversational care, because there's a big gap in the patient experience now. It's all those thousands of other questions that are about living with a disease or a diagnosis. Those are the things that really Ask Ellyn is there to do.
Welcome to This is Perimenopause, the podcast where we delve into the transformative journey of perimenopause and beyond. I'm one of your hosts, Mikkel.
And I'm your other host, Michelle. And we know firsthand how confusing, overwhelming, and downright lonely this phase of life can be.
Join us as we share real-life stories and expert advice to help you navigate this journey and advocate for your best health.
We used to think menopause signaled an end, but really, it's just the beginning.
On today's episode, we have Ellyn Winters-Robinson. This is our second episode on breast cancer in honor of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Ellyn is a crazy dame with a kind heart who has decided to turn breast cancer into a full-time business. Ellyn is a wife, mother, marketing entrepreneur, and, as of a year ago, a breast cancer survivor and advocate. She is also the co-creator of Ask Ellyn, the world's first conversational AI for those on the breast cancer journey, and author of the best-selling book, Flat Please, Hold the Shame. In her day job, Ellyn is co-founder and chief marketing officer of Ignition Communications, a boutique marketing communications firm, and a longtime mentor at the Waterloo Accelerator Center. Ellyn's story has been featured in People Magazine, the Globe and Mail, CTV, and by the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation. Welcome, Ellyn.
Thank you. Yeah, and I am a crazy dame.
We know. We maybe thought we should give our listeners a little heads up. Michelle, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Ellyn, you've been so wonderfully open about your breast cancer journey. And in your book, Flat Please, Hold the Shame, it was just so beautiful. It was honest, it was vulnerable, and it was a beautiful account of your journey. For our listeners who haven't read the book yet, could you please share your journey with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed in March 10th, specifically. These dates are burned in your brain, of 2022. So I'm just about a year and a half out from my diagnosis. And, like most women who face a breast cancer diagnosis, you hear it from your doctor and the first thing you think is, this is just not possible. How is this happening to me? Because I was healthy, I breastfed my children, look at the checklist of things that you're supposed to do to avoid getting breast cancer. No family history. And I kind of bought into all these, myths that exist. Found out that I didn't just have one lump, I actually had 3 lumps in my left breast. One of which after surgery, turns out it was 4.5 centimeters, which is also just crazy to me because in 2019, and I went regularly for my mammograms. And in 2019, I had, the radiology report said unremarkable, but my surgeon, I prefer his language, said perfect. It was a perfect mammogram. So I managed to grow whoppers in basically 2 years and 1 month. I opted to have both my breasts removed in a double mastectomy, or as I like to call it, an extreme breast reduction. Again, I'm a crazy dame. And announced that while I was laying down on the table in surgery, I told the team that I was having an extreme breast reduction. They thought that was funny. And then it all looked pretty good. But then when we got to pathology, the cancer had crept into my lymph nodes in microscopic amounts. So that meant chemotherapy. So I had 12 weeks of chemo last summer. And then had radiation, 15 rounds of radiation. And I finished that in end of November. So I am essentially, nobody likes to say cancer-free because cancer-free, it's kind of a lifelong club. You're never really kind of free of it. They say no evidence of disease. So I am currently in no evidence of disease. And, I'm on a estrogen repressant drug now, and I have to go back every 6 months for infusion of sort of a bone strengthener. But that's just my life right now. So
congratulations.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. I mean, the outcomes for the most part are pretty good with breast cancer. So, I'm hopeful.
I have a bit of we didn't really delve into this question, but I think for a lot of our listeners, there's a curiosity about how do you handle, you just said you're never cancer free, right? So this is now a club you belong to for the rest of your life. How do you manage the anxiety or the stress of that?
I've lived a very good life. I've been very healthy. I'd never even been, in a hospital other than I'd give birth to children before. So I've never even had stitches. So this was all really new to me. And I've never experienced trauma before. And I've learned this is extremely traumatic. I think the stats are actually 1 in 4 women who are diagnosed have PTSD. And this whole notion of, they call it scanxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you have to go back and have a test, and, they're looking for metastasis. And I know people personally who were diagnosed like me at stage 2, and then they get into the CT scan or they get into the bone scan and, oh, it's in the pelvis or it's in the lungs or whatever. So that you are kind of always waiting for that other shoe to drop. I'm an optimistic person by nature. And so I try not to let that rule my life, because then cancer's really winning. And I much prefer to just live each day with as much gratitude and joy as possible, and know that none of us really know what's around the corner and what could happen to us tomorrow. And so it's kind of a bit of a lesson, I think, that we all learn is those that have been diagnosed is life is so precious. Yeah. So you just kind of try and put the trauma, kind of compartmentalize it. It does rear its ugly head if you have to go back for a scan or whatever. I'm not too bad. But some people are very plagued. They are very plagued and almost crippled by it. And I talk to women all the time and try to coach them to embrace what they have versus worry about what's coming next.
What could be? That's amazing advice. And so wonderful that you do that for so many other people.
I mean, whether you've had a cancer diagnosis or not, it should be the way we all live, right?
Absolutely. Ellyn, why did you decide to write a book?
Good question. So I'm a professional communicator by trade. And so I, started journaling mostly just to kind of make sense of what was going on and just to capture where I was at. And the journal's actually tucked away in this desk on the other side. And actually, if I looked at it, it's not really writing this story. It's more like, fuck you, cancer, is kind of scrawled across different pages. I'm a storyteller. I always have been. My mother was a storyteller. I'm a storyteller. And so it did just make sense to me to start, writing my story. And what inspired it, it started with me writing an article or an opinion piece for the Globe and Mail, which appeared just after my surgery and just before I started chemotherapy, talking a little bit about some of the sort of stigmatization around women who've had a mastectomy, that it's sort of presumed that we are like old doddering women who need to, pull on our granny panties and put the Playtex mastectomy bra on and just basically retire from life because we're, deformed and awful. And that made me really angry. And so I wrote this article, and it hit a spark. Like, I had people from across the country reaching out, men, women. They were finding me through my LinkedIn and coming in through all different forms and just saying, oh my gosh, this resonated so much. And so I have a girlfriend in Ottawa, and she said, maybe you should write a book. So I started writing it on my phone at 2:00 in the morning, because you're all hepped up on steroids when you're on chemotherapy. And so I'd be like writing this article, this thing on my book, and it just started to kind of flow out of me. And it just was easy to just recount what was going on in the moment.
It's an incredible read. I'm going to interject here. It's an incredible read. Everyone should read it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And it's a beautiful portrait. Oh my goodness. Gorgeous.
That was from the August portraits that we did. Yeah.
And super fun too. Yeah.
That was really fun. Yeah. Yeah. Girls just want to have fun was playing while that pink shot was taking.
Totally, Ellyn.
The intention was certainly to relate my story, but I wanted to take someone with me on this journey and sort of demystify it. And I also wanted to, in each chapter, include links to resources, because Dr. Google is not your friend when you get diagnosed. And so I wanted to steer people in the moment that they were at to some resources that I knew were good. So if I was talking about a biopsy, there's links to information that, goes into more depth about what a biopsy is about, what the procedure looks like, and that sort of thing. So it was kind of bottling up the knowledge that I had the investment I had made in understanding what was going on and finding good resources, I wanted to bottle that up and share it with others. And that's really kind of the origins of the book.
That's amazing because it is such an overwhelming place to begin. And I understand from conversations with other survivors that the information is not always easy to access and easy to understand or digest.
Yeah, you really have to. I mean, it's not easy to digest. You're sitting in front of a doctor and they're, using doctor language and terminology. Honest to God, in breast cancer, there are more call signals and jargon than it puts Starbucks to shame. You know yourself by call letters. I'm like IDC, ER, PR positive, H2, HER2 negative. That's actually how we identify with each other. I swear to God, we should all have like little secret handshakes. But it's so bewildering when they start throwing this at you. And they're like, oh, have you had a fish test? What's a fish test? It's like, you don't know any of these things. So it is bewildering. The information's out there, but it's in little pockets and different places. And you have to kind of stitch it together. You'll join groups like survivor organizations. I did that. When I was first diagnosed, I was just traumatized, and I called a bunch of friends who I knew who were survivors and interviewed them. And then I joined these groups, which are mostly US based. And it was, fine for about 2 days. And they were like, "You've got this, pink sister." And I'm like, "Yes, I do." And then it got really dark, and then they were like, "Oh, so-and-so died," or "I'm so scared," or "I'm so traumatized," or they're raging about this. And I muted the groups, and then I finally had to leave them because it was just too much. Mm-hmm. So, part of this is also knowing what information you can actually handle at the time that you're at on the journey. And that changes.
It's great advice and a great perspective. Ellyn, one of the big takeaways from your book is that you decided to have a double mastectomy and remain flat instead of having reconstructive surgery. And that seems like it was and probably still is for most a controversial decision. Can you tell us a little bit about, I think it's called aesthetic flat closure or AFC, and how you came to that decision?
So I had no idea that this was even a thing. I hadn't yet met with my surgeon. And I said, I started interviewing friends of mine, and I happened to be on the phone with a friend of mine, Sheila, who I've known since university. And she's the one who said, "Have you ever considered staying flat?" And I can't say I was ever really in love with my double Ds. Like, I always was kind of very cleavagey and would have loved to have been smaller. And so I was kind of intrigued and started looking at it. And then I, found some flat groups, and I started looking at flat closures and seeing women. And it's kind of funny, the flatty movement, they love to take their tops off and kind of wander around on beaches and in forests. And I'm thinking, that's kind of weird. I was doing some research. And so when I did meet with my surgeon, I raised it. He didn't. The thing out of his mouth was, "Wow, you'd look spectacular with implants." So I was like, "Oh, okay." And so I raised aesthetic flat closure, and he said, I've done it. He said it leaves quite a big scar, but that's something that we certainly, I have done it before, and there is a rising movement in this area. And then I started learning about what was involved with reconstruction. We know people who've had boob jobs and have had augmentation. And that's actually a pretty simple. They just basically split you open under here and they slide implants in and everything's fine. But it gets a lot more complicated if you have your breasts removed. There's a whole bunch of if-thens. So there were 3 possibilities for me. So one was immediate reconstruction. So I used to joke and say, I'm either going to go to sleep and wake up with new boobs, little boobs, or no boobs. So new boobs would have been immediate reconstruction. They remove the breast tissue and they slide implants in. And that would be possible if there was no requirement for radiation later on, because implants and radiation do not get along. Radiation on an implant causes something called capsular contraction. And basically the implant kind of gets hard and the boob shrivels. And so it's not a good look. So the little boob scenario was there was enough breast tissue left over that they would do what he called a large lumpectomy, where they would scoop out the cancer, and whatever breast tissue remained, they would give me a little boob, maybe like an A cup or even a double A, and then they would reduce the other side And I was kind of in love with that scenario, I have to say. So that was ruled out. They did an MRI. Unfortunately, the tumors were, I had one large one and then a little bunch that were orbiting around, and the one little bugger was hanging way too far out on the fringe of the party. And so there wasn't enough breast tissue. So it was mastectomy. There was no option there. Of the three scenarios, I got bachelorette number 3. I ended up with no boobs. The other thing that kind of cemented the deal for me, because I would have to have radiation, I would have to stay flat. In this case, probably on one side for about a year, which was something that wasn't really palatable to me. Again, because you have radiated skin, if they do an implant, they would have to wrap that implant in my own tissue, because there's a high rate of rejection of implants in radiated skin. About 40% of implants fail. And it causes what they call skin necrosis. Basically, your skin dies and the implant gives up. And so so now to prevent that, they wrap it in tissue. So they would have taken my lat muscle and carved out the lat muscle and used that as tissue to wrap the implant. And that was like a hard no. I'm into fitness. I love to swim. I want to pick up my grandchild. And so I wasn't going to sacrifice my functional strength for the sake of a boob. And even reconstructed boobs are not pretty things. They're really Franken boobs. I mean, for the most part, they don't have nipples. They're bisected with scars. They look good under clothes, but it's not the same. You don't get the same thing back.
Yeah. Wow. It's all an amazing story and great information. And you're right. I think most of us take for granted, oh, well, we'll just get new boobs. Was there also, Ellyn, an issue with cancer in your left and not in your right? And did they just want to take away one and not the other? I understand that that's often a challenge as well.
It is. And it depends on the surgeon that you have. So surgical guidance in Ontario basically says or dictates to the surgeon that you only take the diseased tissue. So there isn't a lot in terms of supporting cancer migrating, although I didn't trust my body anymore, because I managed to develop 3 whoppers in 2 years on the left side. So what's to say it wasn't going to happen on the right? I have all the respect in the world for women who have one breast removed and can go on with and be happy that way. For me, it wasn't going to be a circumstance where I could feel comfortable. I felt like I would be harnessed to a prosthesis and sort of faking it. And I love my clothes. And so I could see myself dressing flat. It's weird because you're kind of crawling along and there's all these tests and it takes forever. And I was diagnosed in March and I didn't have my surgery till May. But then when they finally have all the information, it's like, he came in and he's like, okay, well, we'll do your surgery in 2 weeks. And here you're signing off on it. Now you have to actually make the really hard decisions. It's like, is it 1 or 2 or whatever? And he sent me home saying, think about it, sleep on it. Because I knew in my head walking out of that office that I wanted both removed. And so I called him the next morning and he was really good. He's like, I'm changing the surgical order, no problem. There's all these studies, which clearly were written by a man, that, say psychologically women are just fine and actually do better with one breast removed versus both. And I'm like, not any woman I've ever talked to would be comfortable with that. But, whatever. But that's, depending on the surgeon, you have to sometimes fight some headwinds in that direction.
Well, and I think you're touching on some of the additional challenges women can face when it comes to their healthcare. We'd love to delve into that a little bit with you about those challenges and the importance of self-advocacy.
Yeah, I had no experience with the healthcare other than my GP, right? And having a baby. And so I was really shocked, appalled by the patriarchy, the misogyny that exists, and this sort of infantilization of women that exists across the healthcare spectrum. My firsthand knowledge is really, and I will say I was very lucky. I had a great care team. There were moments, they're a little quizzical about me making the decision to stay flat. My oncologist is a woman and she asked me twice, she could see she was not reading the room, because I'm clearly very proud of my chest and my scars. And she's like, you're not reconstructing.
Wow.
There are doctors out there that this is just so abhorrent to me. I mean, I talk to women all the time. And again, this is not my experience, but I'm part of a lot of flat groups where women are left mutilated. And there's surgeons that don't care. There are surgeons that close with staples. There are surgeons who overrule a woman while they're asleep on the table, where the woman thinks that they're having a flat enclosure. And the surgeon says, yeah, no, we left you with skin because you're going to change your mind. And so they're left with these, like, one woman described it as sad hot dog buns. Basically, you have like these like empty boob sacks that are, bifurcated by scars. And these women are left devastated, or they're left with dog ears. They call them dog ears, which is like, especially if you're a heavier woman, big patches of fat that sit underneath their arms, so they can't even get their arms down. And then they have to go back in and have revision surgery. We did this portrait series, and we have a young trans male who had surgery, and the surgeon's like, I'm retiring. Yeah, I didn't do a very good job. Could have done better. I'm like, seriously? And they left this poor dude mutilated. He's now since had revision surgery. But I'm just like, it's slightly longer surgery to leave somebody actually looking proud of their body it's just mystifying to me that surgeons feel this way. It gets me very angry.
Yeah, as it should.
And there's gaslighting all over. I mean, women that have menopause or PCOS or endometriosis, they're gaslit as well. There's a lot of issues just even with women who are of a younger age who present with a concern about breast cancer, a lump that they've found, and they're gaslit by their doctors to say, oh, it's nothing, it's a cyst.
You're too young.
You're too young. Or they refuse them a mammogram, and then these poor women show up. I mean, we just lost a woman. We all followed her on Twitter, and she was just 39, and again, wasn't believed and didn't find her lump until it was too late.
So what advice do you have, whether women are being dismissed because they're too young to have breast cancer, or they're too young to be in perimenopause, or the other end of the spectrum where this paternalistic approach to women's health is infantilizing them and saying, no, we'll decide for you. What do you recommend based on, your experience?
I was extremely lucky that I had a surgeon who was very collegial and was not, didn't see himself on a pedestal. Now, I was very forceful with him and very clear on what my expectations were. In fact, to the point where I sent him surgical literature. And I remember somebody at Women's College said, you sent your surgeon a surgical journal article. I'm like, yeah, I did. And they're like, really? So I was really lucky in that way. And I really feel for women who are in a position where there's a power imbalance. And that one I don't know how to solve, other than we just need to keep speaking up for ourselves and not take no for an answer and be really emphatic. And I think it's also put you in a very scary place. Let's say a scenario where someone finds a lump and the doctor's not believing them or dismissing them. It's weird because at the same time that doctor is actually saying to us what we want to hear. No woman wants to hear, oh, I think there's a concern and maybe we should go that next step, And so you have to it takes an extra level of bravery to push back and say, no, there's something wrong. Like, I know my body. And that's a hard one.
And you also need to be really informed, right? And it's sometimes hard to do that, to your point about the misinformation and being able to find the accurate information. Maybe we could just touch quickly on the screening guidelines. I know you're well-versed. Maybe you could just chat with us a bit about that, just so that everyone listening knows what they should be doing and what their rights are.
Yep. So some context, women are developing breast cancer at a younger age. We don't know why, but it's happening. And there's a recent JAMA journal that says that cancers are showing up earlier, and breast cancer is one that is growing at a faster rate. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, the survival rates are actually very good. The other thing is that Black women tend to develop a more aggressive form of cancer younger as well. And so some of the driving forces for changing the guidelines are to net in more of the Black population, particularly in the US. So the FDA has recently, or the Preventative Health Task Force in the United States, has recently amended its screening guidelines, and screening will now routinely start at the age of 40. In Canada, there's the federal and the provincial level. And so this is where it gets a little muddly. So the federal task force is holding fast at this point to a philosophy that screening should start at 50. And we're not particularly optimistic that that's going to change, despite the medical community, despite women's voices saying that that needs to change. We're hopeful, but not hopeful that that's going to change at the federal level. That said, provinces have autonomy, and there's quite a number of provinces that are moving toward screening starting at 40, New Brunswick being the most recent. We're hopeful Ontario is going to make a move in that direction as well. Coupled with that, now in Ontario, women are now informed of their breast density. That's as of July. And so now when you get your mammogram, and I would invite most women, which they probably don't know this, you can subscribe for $49 a year. I sound like I'm doing a pitch for them, but for $49 a year, you can subscribe to this tool called Pocket Health, which is a Canadian technology. And you can get access to all your screening. Like, I can pull down and look at all my breast imaging. It's empowering to me to be able to have access. I wish I'd known that beforehand. I didn't know that until I was diagnosed with cancer, but you can have access to Pocket Health at any time and see your images, and you can see your radiology reports. And so you'll see on there that, you'll see your density. My girlfriend just reached out the other day and she's found out she's density D, which is the most dense. And then know your rights around that. So if you have very dense breasts, you should be getting supplemental screening. You should be having an ultrasound in addition to a mammogram, because mammograms can't see through dense breast tissue. The other thing I wish I'd known is that in the province of Ontario, after the age of 50, you do not have to wait for the letter to come in the mail for you to be summoned for a mammogram. I did not know this. You can go and self-refer at the age of 50. So you can have a mammogram annually if you choose to. And no one can refuse you that. And I wish I'd known that, because perhaps if I had gone in 2020 or 2021, perhaps the cancer would have been caught earlier. Perhaps I wouldn't have lost my breast. Perhaps I wouldn't have been in chemotherapy. I think the universe had a design for me, but, I wish I'd known that.
I think this is a good spot to talk about the universe had a different plan, or had a plan for you. And you've said before, you're taking your cancer diagnosis and you're turning it into a business and you're changing lives. Your newest, greatest thing, I think it's launching on October 26th, is Ask Ellyn. And it's an amazing new tool to support women and their families through this journey. We definitely need to know all about this. So can you please tell us what Ask Ellyn is?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to the book. So I, as I say, I wrote the book in the hopes that, I had this dream that, it would be something that women would be given when they're first diagnosed. So it's not just the shitty pamphlet. You actually get a real story that, is based on lived experience. And then I, working in tech as I do, and working at the Accelerator Center, I'm on a call with one of our studio clients, and we're doing a brand values thing. It's all about them. And I mentioned that I had a breast cancer diagnosis, and one founder who I'd never met before, he's a really inquisitive guy, Patrick, and he started peppering me with questions on the call, and the call just took this 180 turn. It suddenly became all about me. And unbeknownst to me, he and a couple of his friends and colleagues were considering a venture that was around artificial intelligence and AI and conversational AI. They wanted to do something that was AI for good. So they had the tech, I had the story, and within 3 weeks, I sent him my manuscript, and within 3 weeks, he had created an MVP of this Ask Ellyn, which is the world's first conversational AI for people on the breast cancer journey. And I say people on the breast cancer journey because it's not just people who have been diagnosed, but for every person that's diagnosed, there's 10 other people around them that are equally traumatized. Family, husbands, partners, we're all on this together. And in some ways, they actually find it tougher because the person that's diagnosed kind of is in the eye of the hurricane, and you're just on your plan and you just do what you need to do. And you find your well of strength, and the others are just like helpless bystanders, like watching this car accident happen, right? And then again, the universe had a design. There's a third guy joined the team. He had just left Shopify. He also, sadly, had just lost his mother to in a car accident. And he just had this profound life-changing moment where he wanted to do something really meaningful. And so Chris has been the developer on this project and has just been absolutely amazing. So yeah, so we're launching her on the 25th of October. I'm actually in the process of setting up a nonprofit because we want Ask Ellyn to always be free to those who need her. And so that's my next, oh my gosh, I'm doing a startup and I have to find funding for a nonprofit and fuel this thing. And yeah, it's as scary as hell, as you know, what start doing a startup's like. And yeah, I'm starting a business, but the business is making no money, which my husband, looks at me sideways about. So
welcome to the club.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking, welcome to my world, Ellyn. So where do I find Ask Ellyn? Like, how does this work? How do I interact with her?
She's going to be a web app. She's accessible right now and will be as of October 25th. The URL is Ask Ellyn with a Y, ELLYN.ai. She's free to use. There's no registration. We don't capture any personal information. The way she works is they built this amazing custom implementation on top of OpenAI and ChatGPT. And so it takes advantage of all those technologies. They did this amazing job of capturing not my spoken voice, but the way of expressing myself that is found in the book. And so she learned off the book initially. We set her up with two really hard guidelines that I, sort of instructions I gave to the team. One was that she always has to be supportive and empathetic. So she can never be dismissive. And they've designed her in such a way that she meets you sort of emotionally where you're at. So if you're sharing happy news with her, she'll rejoice with you. If you're angry, she'll meet you at that level. And then she always incorporates lived experience, just as if you were talking to a friend, to say, well, when this happened to me, this was my story. And so she does that. And then she'll always end on a supportive note. And then she incorporates the links that, I built for the book. So if you're talking about getting a biopsy, she'll include links that will take you to more information if you choose to go there. She will tell jokes. You can ask her Netflix recommendations for a binge watch if you want. So, she's not all sad and sorrow. The other thing that Chris did that was just amazing, because when he lost his mother, he had to turn around and tell his 4-year-old that grandma was not going to come home. And so he built into Ask Ellyn a language understanding. So if someone is asking her questions in a very simplistic form, she will adjust her response to meet them where they're at. So for example, if I asked a question that was posed by a child to Ask Ellyn, she will respond as if it's a mother or a father talking to that child. And that's a real wow moment when we show that, because she doesn't use heavy language. She doesn't even use the word cancer. She'll talk about, maybe you can draw pictures with mommy because mommy's feeling sick right now. Or it's really quite emotive when you see it.
Magical.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand she speaks multiple languages?
She does, because of OpenAI, it's multilingual. And so she is completely conversant in every language. That was a real crazy moment for me. I knew she would probably understand Latin-based languages like Italian and French and things like that. But I then did some translation, and thanks to the AC, we have a very multilingual staff. And so I had them review, because I obviously don't read Mandarin. And so I was having people read back the responses to me, and she is spot on. It's perfect, like perfect Russian, perfect Persian. And again, this is where the intersection between the work that we did on the photo shoot and this project have kind of come together. I've learned so much about the cultural differences and cultural norms in approaching breast cancer. And I've realized that, again, if I'm, of a traditional Southeast Asian family, or if I'm from a Muslim background, I am not comfortable talking to doctors about this. I don't understand what that doctor's saying. I may bring someone with me who can translate, but they're also not necessarily a native speaker in English. Or I just don't talk about it at all. I've heard from families who say, oh no, we don't even tell our family that this is something we're going through. And that just breaks my heart to think these women are going through a diagnosis I almost want to cry. But it just breaks my heart to think that they are going through this alone, and to be able to have a place where they can go and ask questions and get responses, or prepare for a medical meeting, because I can go to Ask Ellyn and say, what should I ask my surgeon? Or what should I ask my oncologist? Or what's this procedure going to be like? They can go into a medical appointment better equipped and better prepared, and not feel so lonely on the journey. And that's pretty profound for me.
Thank you, Ellyn. Like it's beautiful what you've done. It's incredible.
Well, I couldn't have done it without the universe.
Okay, we'll give the universe a little bit of credit, but the rest goes to you.
Thank you.
For people that have never used ChatGPT or don't know anything about AI, can I go on? Like, is this going to be hard for me to figure out?
No, as long as you understand how to use just any kind of chat tool. It's a very simple interface. I mean, it's very Google-esque.
I've played around with her. Yeah, she's pretty awesome. Almost as awesome as you are.
She's also very chatty, just like her mistress. She's long-winded in some of her responses.
In what other ways, Ellyn, can you see a tool like Ask Ellyn supporting and guiding women's health?
Well, my big ambition is that breast cancer is just the beginning. With the formation of this nonprofit, do we go to other diseases? I'm in conversations with some big players in the market who could see Ask Ellyn being adapted. So the tech stack is there, and all it needs now is to be married with lived experience. And so we could build an Ask Fred about lung cancer, or Ask Marie about pancreatic cancer, or we could do, Ask Mikkel about perimenopause. I mean, we sort of dream little dreams that maybe we'll have a Michael J. Fox for Parkinson's. And so as long as we have that lived patient experience, we don't even need a book. I mean, we could use voice recordings or video recordings or patient interviews, really on just the stages and steps in the progression of a disease, and we can build something like this. So in my crazy mind, I'd like to see a whole new category of healthcare created called conversational care, because there's a big gap in the patient experience now, because all the doctors can do, all they really should be doing, is keep you alive. And so it's all those thousands of other questions that are about living with a disease or a diagnosis, that those are the things that really Ask Ellyn is there to do. She's not meant to be the WebMD of a diagnosis. That's a doctor's job. So she can't and won't ever dispense medical advice. But she can talk to you about what it's like to get chemo curls, or what bathing suit you should wear if you're flat, or again, how to prepare for medical appointments and that sort of thing.
Amazing. I think the confidence that a tool like Ask Ellyn will provide can't be overstated. To your point about needing to be informed and needing to advocate, and having that knowledge and feeling of empowerment, and the notion, or the feeling, I guess, that you're not alone.
And having it kind of curated and brought back to you so that you're not having to do, because it's hard enough to be dealing with this and all the other stresses that come with a diagnosis, to then add, I've got to go out and research and parse through information and read books and, become a academic expert on the disease diagnosis that I've got. It's a lot, right? And so, yeah, I'm hoping it's very empowering. I think we're still very early days, in terms of AI, which is great. I mean, I'm kind of on the bleeding edge here. I think there is a lot of conversation around AI in healthcare for sure. A lot of it is how AI can be used to alleviate the administration burden. But there is also this conversation around patient experience, and the two haven't gotten connected yet. And so I'm hoping that's what the epiphany that goes off when people see this and start using it is this fills a real patient experience gap.
You mentioned a few times a photo shoot. Tell us a bit about that.
It started last year. So there's an amazing photographer here in Waterloo Region. Her name's Hillary Gold. She is an award-winning photographer, and she's got a heart as big as the great outdoors. And last August, when I was in chemotherapy, because I'm crazy dang, I reached out to Hillary and I said, could we do a photo shoot together? Part of it was me taking back my power. One of the things that I've said a bunch of times, it's, I think, quite profound for women, is breast cancer. I mean, I don't have lived experience with other diseases, but breast cancer strips you of everything that we think growing up makes us a woman, right? We fixate on our hair, our eyelashes, our eyebrows, our boobs. I mean, I think the only thing it doesn't do is take your butt, which I never had one anyways. But, I was bald. I lost my breasts. I had no hair. And so it's easy to feel very, very stripped. I mean, on one hand, it really makes you start to realize where your power comes from and what your beauty really, truly is. So I reached out to Hillary and we did this photo shoot. I didn't even recognize myself because, I mean, I was not the girl that was going to strut around in undies. And I'm like walking around in undies, and then I take my top off, and I had these, big scars on my chest, and Hillary, it was very emotional. She started to weep, and she's like, shit, I kind of knew you'd be bald, but I wasn't really expecting that level of sort of bare. And so that started us thinking about doing a photo essay. She's done this for Down syndrome a few times. Actually, this, I think, the 10th year next year, where we would portray survivors of breast cancer in a very authentic way. There's this real middle-aged white woman dressed in pink tutu trope that exists in breast cancer, and we're seeing it right now in Breast Cancer Awareness Month everywhere. And so in planning out this photo series, we're very intentional to be as diverse and representative as possible in the faces that we were portraying. And we chose not to do shock factor. The other recognition we had was a lot of the campaigns kind of talk to survivors, like celebrating survivors and their strength, and kind of in the survivor echo chamber. And at the same time, the message is not getting across to people out there to do their self-checks, to go get screened, to advocate for themselves. And so we needed to break through that noise. So we worked with a DEI coach. We have 31 individuals that we shot through the summer. The whole portrait series is on Dense Breast Canada website. We partnered with Jenny as an awareness campaign. And then we have a portrait a day that's being released through the month of October with their stories. And we have all different ethnicities represented. We have all genders represented. We have ages from 26 to 73. It's just been really a wonderful, really meaningful project. Amazing stories. Like we have Sharon, who's an Indigenous woman from this area who comes from a family of healers. And she was diagnosed at stage 4. The doctor basically declared her palliative and said, we'll just make you comfortable. And she did a combination of Western medicine and traditional healing medicines. And her cancer disappeared from her lungs. Her doctor keeps looking at her and saying, you shouldn't be here. And she's like, I am. And she's a real character. She's a single-breasted lady. And so she has a prosthesis. She calls her Betty Boob. She's a real character.
Ellyn, what's the one thing you want to tell every woman listening about breast cancer?
That it can happen to you. It can happen to anyone. And don't buy into the I don't have any family history, because 85% of breast cancers have no family history. Don't buy into I'm too young. Don't buy into that. Be in tune with your body. Know you're normal. And if you find something, please don't be afraid, because the earlier a cancer is caught, the more we can do about it. And so just don't bury your head in the sand.
Great advice for everything in life, I would say, not just breast cancer. Thank you.
True.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you like what you hear, please take a moment to rate and subscribe to our podcast. When you do this, it helps to raise our podcast profile so more women can find us and get a little better understanding of what to expect in perimenopause.
We also read all the reviews, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to help us continuously improve our show. We would love to hear from you. You can connect with us through the podcast, on social media, or through our website. Our information, as well as links and details from our conversation today, can be found in the show notes. This podcast is for general information only. It's designed to educate, inspire, and support you on your personal journey through perimenopause. The information and opinions on this podcast are not intended to be a substitution for primary care, diagnosis, or treatment. The information on this podcast does not replace professional healthcare advice. The use of the information discussed is at the sole discretion of the listener. If you are suffering from symptoms or have questions, please consult a qualified healthcare practitioner.